Hi everyone, my name is Mia D'Annunzio and I will discuss verbal and nonverbal communication in India. Let's start with some brief background of the Indian language. According to an article by Thirumali, the Republic of India does not have a national language. Rather, the languages of India belong to several different families. Two of the major families are the Indo-Aryan and Dravidian languages. Approximately 73% of Indians speak Indo-Aryan languages, and 24% speak Dravidian languages. The majority of the remaining languages spoken belong to the Tibeto-Burman and Austro-Asiatic language families. According to the most recent census of India in 2001, 30 languages are spoken by more than 1 million native speakers. 60 languages have more than 100,000 native speakers, and another 122 languages are spoken by more than 10,000 native speakers. The Indian census uses two specific classifications, language and mother tongue. The mother tongues are grouped within each language. For example, there are tens of millions of speakers that are officially grouped under the language Hindi. There are many differences in both verbal and nonverbal communication between India and the US. Let's start with verbal communication first. To begin, it is common for people in India to speak to one another while maintaining a distance of arm's length or even closer. According to the website culturalindia.net, personal space and distance when speaking to someone are a lot smaller in India as compared to the United States. The picture on this page shows a group of Indian men standing in line in very close proximity to one another. During one of my interviews, a male Indian colleague shared a story of a time when he and an American doctor traveled to India together. They were waiting in a line, and similar to the picture, Indian men were standing very close behind the two men. The American man had a large backpack on and turned to the side for a moment, creating a small gap in the line. An Indian man behind him quickly closed the gap, and when the American man turned forward once more, his backpack harshly knocked into the man standing close behind him and caused him to lose his balance and fall. Of course, the American stepped out of line and ran over to the Indian man that he had inadvertently knocked over to make sure he was okay. When he looked up, his spot in line had immediately closed. That being said, in the US, it is customary to speak with one another from a further distance to avoid feeling crowded and/or uncomfortable. In general, the majority of Indian people make direct eye contact during conversation. However, a woman from a conservative or traditional background may speak from behind the veil of her sari. It is not common for Indian people to touch one another during conversation unless they know the person well or are peers. For example, elderly people in India may take offense if they are touched during conversation because it is viewed as informal. In the United States, it is normal to touch someone's arm or hand when speaking to them. In India, verbal and nonverbal conversation with the opposite sex tends to be more conservative than it is in the United States. During most large social and official gatherings, men and women will tend to stay clustered in groups of the same sex in India. This is different than the United States, where men and women mingle freely during social gatherings. In general, the conversations with friends tend to be more formal in India than in the United States. In India, it is considered inappropriate to be direct when asking questions, and one should not expect an immediate response. In the United States, direct questions and comments are very common in daily conversations. The book Speaking of India by Craig Story explains that Indians also have a difficult time saying no and are inclined to tell you what you want to hear instead of the truth. It is common for Americans to say no or to disagree during conversations. Silence or pauses in conversations are common in India, and may be used to show emphasis or disapproval. Conversely, American conversations are usually very fast-paced, with little or no lulls. It is considered inappropriate to ask an Indian personal questions, and as well as to always be the one to speak first. It is customary for Indian people to be very polite and well-mannered. Therefore, when engaged in conversation with an Indian, one should be careful to talk about things of interest to the person in which you're conversing with. A recent article by Carolyn Gregoire explains some common topics for discussion in India may include family-oriented themes or discussing facts about yourself such as marital status, family, educational background, or where you grew up or the country you're from. It is also appropriate to speak about hobbies or sports. Specifically, Indian people are known to enjoy cricket, soccer, and field hockey. Other neutral topics that may be discussed are nature or music. Food is another excellent topic for discussion. However, it is important to first find out if the person you are speaking to is a vegetarian, because they may find discussion about meats to be offensive. Of note, the picture on this slide was taken from the website of a delicious Indian restaurant in New York City called Darbar, and is a traditional Indian dish. Last, it is recommended to avoid controversial topics, such as politics, when communicating with an Indian. In the United States, it is much more acceptable to talk about fractious topics or have a disagreement during conversation. Next, I will discuss nonverbal communication in India. India is a high-context culture, and there is heavy reliance on nonverbal gestures. For example, people in India greet one another by placing their palms together in front of their chest, bowing their head, and saying namaste. It is not customary to bow the body during this greeting, rather only the head. The young woman in the picture on this slide is engaged in this common gesture. Moving on. In India, it is considered rude to point a finger at someone, and many Indians point to something using their whole hand or often their chin. For example, if you need to get the attention of a waiter in a restaurant in India, you should make eye contact or try to gesture to him with your right hand stretched out, palm facing down, and moving your fingers toward yourself. A book by Mehrabian called Nonverbal Communication states that Indian men are quite westernized, and they will often reach out to shake your hand. However, will only do so with those of the same sex. For example, an Indian man will shake hands with another man. However, he will not do so with a woman. Therefore, if you are a foreigner woman, you should avoid initiating a handshake with an Indian man. Usually, Indian women do not give handshakes. However, one exception to this rule is that a woman may give a handshake to a child. Likewise, if the child did something that is perceived to be good, the Indian woman will hug or put her hand on the child's head as the memento of acknowledgement. Other nonverbal cues common to Indian people are touching their earlobes to express remorse or honesty, and apologizing by tapping the shoulder of the person they are apologizing to, and then tapping their own forehead. Last, one of the more confusing yet common nonverbal cue in India is known as the Indian head wobble. The meaning of this gesture may change depending on the exact location within India, and may mean anything from yes to no or I understand. That sums up my portion of our presentation. If you are interested in learning more about verbal and nonverbal communication practices in India, please feel free to review a list of works cited during this presentation. Next, Kenneth will discuss written and visual communication in India.